So thank you so much for such a great introduction. I am very blessed and happy to be here with you all today. And I'm hoping that you will gain something from the information that I'm about to share. As you probably saw from some of the advertising, the subject for today is tightening up our mental health. The title for today is Optimal Mental Health for Success: Resilience During Stressful Times. Resiliency during stressful times. And again, I'm Dr. Karen. Do you suffer from belly fat? Maybe your culprit is high cortisol. All you have to do is take these supplements and you'll be okay and lose all that fat. How many of you have seen this commercial? You've probably seen it a lot in print ads, on TV. And when we hear the word cortisol, we often associate it with belly fat. I want to tell you a little bit about my story and my background so you get to know me a little bit better and what I have come to know about this word cortisol. Cushing syndrome, caused by excess cortisol in the body. It affects 1 in every 3 million people, and if left untreated, it will lead to death. It's considered a rare disease because doctors say that it is rarely seen. Adrenal insufficiency is the opposite of Cushing syndrome. It's inadequate production of cortisol in the body. It causes a person to be steroid dependent, and because of inadequate cortisol, stress can kill. Why am I telling you about this? Because I had a personal journey where I had to learn about cortisol in the body. You see, I suffered from a rare life threatening illness called Cushing's disease, which is a form of Cushing syndrome. And cortisol is your stress hormone. As you saw in the first slide, many people associate the word cortisol with belly fat because of the commercials, but you actually need cortisol to live. Cortisol is your fight or flight hormone. It helps you compensate rather for physical and or emotional trauma and stress, and it is life sustaining. So you see, while I understood cortisol to be just this thing that I could take supplements for because of my own personal journey and having symptoms for 5 years before being diagnosed and knocking on death's door, I learned the hard way that the body actually does have a function that responds to stress. And there is so much emphasis on stress from the body that there is an actual entire hormone that deals with stress. I went from having Cushing's to having Addison's or adrenal insufficiency, which is the opposite of Cushing. Because Cushing's, after finally being diagnosed, I had brain surgery, which was a form of transsphenoidal surgery, where they removed a very minute tumor from my pituitary gland. And after recurrence of the illness, I had to have both of my adrenal glands removed, which is called a bilateral adrenalectomy. This was done because I had tumor cells floating around, I still do, in my pituitary on the base of my brain, and they had to target the direct source of the excess cortisol. So the pituitary communicates to the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys, and those kidneys, those adrenal glands on those kidneys pump out the cortisol as needed. But in my case, it was just never going to stop, and I was going to continue getting sicker and sicker. As a result of having no adrenals, I went again to the other end of the spectrum and now live with, ironically, another life threatening illness called adrenal insufficiency. My life took an unexpected path. You see, the most overt symptom of Cushing's is unexplained and a rapid weight gain. So the first sign that something was wrong was I gained 30 pounds in 30 days. I earned my doctorate in clinical psychology in 2005, but just a couple of years later, I became symptomatic. Continued to be functional for quite a few years, but eventually became very non functioning and again was knocking on death's door. I couldn't find anyone to help me in Chicago, Illinois, with all of the world renowned institutions here. So I ended up joining a team, or having a team rather, on my medical team in Seattle, Washington, where pre COVID I traveled every year since 2011, where I had my brain surgery in Seattle. An unexpected path. You know, we all have plans, especially when it comes to our finances, our goals for building wealth, and all of that. But when your life takes an unexpected path, which is why I'm talking to you about my backstory right now, it can take a mental and emotional toll. You experience several different emotions. And this is what we're going through now, because one of the things that I will touch on a little bit later is that now the whole world can relate to some of the things that have been a part of my recent path. Stay at home order, staying at home out of necessity, being isolated from others physically, perhaps losing a job or having to add something to your career path. And all of that can cause all of these emotions, including loneliness, despair, helplessness, hopelessness, fear, anxiety, betrayal, anger, confusion. 4.5 years ago, I founded Empowering People with Invisible Chronic Illness Foundation, otherwise known as the EPIC Foundation. And it was because I really didn't feel like I had anyone to not only relate to my experience until I found groups and other survivors, but I really had a hard time with people being able to relate to my experience of the world changing in a blink of an eye. And so while I was in private practice and that was the track that I thought I was going to take forever, I founded this organization to help others. And mental health is a part of that mission, to empower people to thrive with chronic illness. And change and mental health changes and things like that are all a part of that mission, as I said. I want to speak to some of the main issues that come with the experience of having things change, because they are big adjustments. And the reason I'm talking to you guys about this today is because of the fact that, yes, we are living in the middle of the pandemic. And what was alarming to me in the beginning of this thing is, of course, everyone was so focused on the physical aspects of dealing with COVID, right? But not many people were even speaking to the mental health, emotional aspects. In fact, it wasn't until recently that mental health workers were even really truly considered essential workers. But, you know, mental health workers have been on the front lines from the beginning in the sense of being present for people who are dealing with so much during this pandemic. And like I said, the entire world can now relate to things changing in the blink of an eye. And so I want to speak to a couple of the main issues that come up or may have come up for you even in dealing with this entire time period that we're dealing with right now, whether you have personally been impacted by COVID or not. Those two main issues include 5 stages of loss and trauma. So we're going to start with the 5 stages of loss. Those stages include denial and isolation, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I'm going to start with denial and isolation. That is the initial process of suppressing real feelings. So this involves denying and pushing away the issue because it's just way too hard to deal with. It might include avoidance of facing the issue overtly. It might involve people saying, move on, get over it. I don't know how many of you have heard that, but where people are like, okay, we're a year into this time. Just get over it. It's not that big a deal. Some people in relation to COVID say that it doesn't even exist, it's a hoax. Some of you may have lost a loved one or may know someone who's lost a loved one. And you may feel a sense of shock like that person is not really gone. Isolation occurs when you can no longer deny and it's just too hard to face. There are reasons for anger when denial can no longer be maintained. Anger can come from a complete loss of control. Life seems just really unfair right now, especially if this time period is impacting financial areas and other areas. And you might feel like no one can relate to your own experience. Bargaining happens when anger no longer works. So, this is the phenomenon where you say, maybe if I do this, then something magically will happen. Or, you start to question maybe something that you did, you know, produce this situation right now. If you've lost a source of employment or income rather, or something has happened, you may be self-blaming and say, maybe I'm being punished for bad behavior. And on the contrary, maybe if I engage in really great behavior, then I'll be rewarded. And then finally, you might say, what did I do to deserve this? And what can I do to fix it? Depression, denial, anger, and bargaining turns to a sense of loss. And that can happen in various forms. Again, during this pandemic, you might fear the infection. There might be a change in your functioning if you have become sick. Financially, and this is a financial workshop, so our finances are impacted in every way, whether you've been able to maintain employment or not. I hear that the stock market fluctuates up and down depending on where we are with the pandemic. Job or career loss might have happened. We're physically distancing, so some of you may be going into the office, but many of us are not going into a physical office. The world as we know it has completely changed. Maybe your role at home has changed. So if there's a two-person household or two-parent household, and both of you have worked, and now one person either has a different kind of job or has lost a job, you start to negotiate roles in the household, and that can lead to a great sense of loss. And acceptance is the final thing I want to talk about. And I will talk about radical acceptance later, which is a term in psychology as well. But I want to point out the fact that acceptance does not mean that you're happy about the situation. I don't think anybody's happy about the way that the pandemic has impacted things or our overall mental health. But it is a form of accepting what is. And it also means that your hope persists. A quick note about the 5 stages of loss is that it's not linear. So as you look through these, I don't want you to think that you go from denial to anger to bargaining to depression and finally acceptance. It can be a very circular process, and it can happen simultaneously. The stages can happen simultaneously, and they can bounce back from one stage to another. So you may have reached a point of acceptance, but then you go back to feeling angry and you're like, wait a minute, I accepted this, I was good. Why am I feeling so mad at the world right now? Because things are not going the way that I want them to. And I want you to know that that is normal because, again, it is a very layered process and it's not a linear process. The other thing I want to point out is that many people, especially in the chronic illness community, a lot of people were saying, well, okay, the world can relate to us now. We've been dealing with it. And then they're shocked when they have even a greater sense of loss, and trauma. And what I often say is that this is a completely different layer of trauma. So even if you've experienced working from home, whether you are chronically ill or not, maybe you just worked from home in general and you thought to yourself, well, this isn't really a shift from what I was doing before. What I want to validate for you is that no, it is quite different. This past year has been quite traumatic on so many different levels. And my observations have included this, that people are extremely anxious during this time, that people are having a feeling of being out of control of their situation, so feelings of helplessness. There's a sense of hypervigilance where people are just constantly looking out for the other shoe to drop. There's a fear of the unknown because we really don't know per se what's going to happen next. And all of this trauma can actually even manifest physically and lead to physical symptoms. You know, we've talked about extensively the cortisol, that there's a hormone in and of itself set aside by the body to deal with stress. And so the body does have a reaction to stressors that come from the outside. And today I'm going to talk about how to deal with that. The world is stressed. The definition of stress, it's something that causes emotional strain or tension. And so you might feel that in various ways. But one of the things that I do through my foundation and that I want to convey to you today is that we empower people who are dealing with stress. We empower them to thrive. To empower means to make someone more confident in claiming their rights. And to thrive means to progress towards goals despite your circumstances. That's why the title was Resilience. In the midst of these stressful situations, I want to define resilience. By the Webster Dictionary, it's defined as the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. But this is a little bit of my paraphrase, because I want to say that it's the capacity to recover at all from difficulties. So there's no timeline, because the reason why I'm conveying this is because you may think to yourself, well, I'm not strong enough to deal with this. It's been several months, it's been a year. I'm still feeling out of sorts. But I want to say to you that resilience, or resiliency, as some people say, is the capacity to thrive despite adversity at all and at any point in time. My personal philosophy is that we take that adversity and we turn it into an opportunity to walk in our purpose and to overcome these obstacles. And we overcome them towards the goal of achieving financial and overall success in our lives. So I want to go over a couple of empowerment principles, and I'm looking at my time here because I want to leave room for questions. But I want to share with you some of the principles that are going to be very helpful. And again, I don't want to draw this out, so I will pretty much paraphrase, but please feel free to read my descriptions. I want to talk about empowerment and mindfulness. I want to convey that having optimism does not mean denying your feelings. And it doesn't mean that if you have negative feelings, that you are less empowered. Of course, we're going to have negative feelings because we're human. So we're not going to be happy about things that don't go our way. So some people think, though, that if I'm not happy about my circumstances, that means that it's contrast to optimism. And what I want to say to you is that it really is not. You can maintain a glass half full rather attitude, and you can hold on to optimism while also acknowledging how you feel. And that brings me to the point of talking about mindfulness. Mindfulness is being present in the moment. Sometimes we're like looking in the past, we're looking in the future, or we're trying to block and use other mechanisms in order to not even deal with the negative feelings. But what I want to share with you, which is, might sound a little unorthodox or counterintuitive, is that it's okay to not be okay at times. That when you try to push away all of those feelings that you're obviously going to have, when you deny those feelings or don't validate them for yourselves, it gives it more power. So, being present in that moment of sadness, that allows you to give yourself the power to be in that space. Alternatively, it's okay to be happy. It's okay to experience any sort of feeling that you're having, because on the contrary, there are some people who feel guilty for feeling happy because, maybe they know someone who's struggling. You have a family member or someone that you know who's lost a job, and you're laughing and you're happy and you're feeling guilty, kind of like a survivor's guilt because other people are going through it. But I want you to know that it's okay to be mindful of whatever state that you're in, and it's not a knock against anyone else. So, how do we stay empowered? Continuing this, true power is internal. So, true power is saying that despite our circumstances, again, that we are choosing to remain optimistic while we acknowledge those feelings that might be negative. But it comes from the stance that we can behave in ways and make empowered conscious choices where we acknowledge that we have control. There's this term, a psychological term called a locus of control. It can be either internal or external. So, as you probably are guessing, an external locus of control is projecting control or power outwardly. So, everything that happens to you is because of some outside circumstance or person, you know. An internal locus of control, on the contrary, is when you take personal accountability for what's happening in your life. So you acknowledge that you have the power to make decisions. No, you cannot control things that are happening around you, like the pandemic or getting sick. In my case, dealing with chronic illnesses. But you can control the behaviors that you engage in and how you present. You want to stay connected. So, in the world of physical distancing right now, I want to make the distinction between physical distancing and isolation. So, we are physically distancing right now, and many of us are not seeing our families, we're not seeing our friends. Isolating, on the other hand, though, involves completely removing yourself emotionally, spiritually, removing that connection altogether. That is not what you want to do. You want to stay connected, and who you stay connected to is vitally important. You want to stay connected to empowered and empowering people. So, people who have the same mindset as you, who are empowered themselves, and people who seek to empower you. And finally, you want to focus on what you want. So, daily visualization, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a couple of minutes here, is very important as well. How do we stay empowered? Continued. Be positive. So, like I said before, you can both be mindful and positive, and want to reiterate again, keeping your vision. And we're going to talk about making a vision board. So Jack Canfield, who was quoted on the previous slide, he has a quote that is actually one of my top three favorite quotes. He says, when you have inspired thought, you must trust it and you must act on it, which is very scary, especially during this time, to act on inspired thought. But I would encourage you, tightening up your mental health includes being very deliberate and intentional and putting your intention out there in various ways of what you want to see come to pass. So let's talk a little bit about the vision board. So when you have a vision, as you see in this pink graphic right here, there are various areas of your life that you want to have vision about: health, wealth, love, fitness, family, career, spiritual visions, personal development, and your home life. We're talking this week about financial fitness. and abundance and wealth. And that definitely should be a part of your vision. And so I pulled examples of several types of vision boards. Like I said, you want to remain intentional. Some people, like I have a vision board that spans across my wall. There was a point in my life where I was completely bedridden for a couple of years and I couldn't even get out of the bed. I had to be carried to the bathroom. If all I could do was turn myself over, I was going to look at that vision board, which still spans across my wall, and look at words like walk, run, health, better, miracles. I mean, I was going to look at that every single day. And I went from not being able to move my toes to being back to being a functioning person. So you ought to be intentional. There are vision boards that are portable, so that I thought this was very creative, making a vision board in a journal. I've never seen it where you can like stretch it out and look at, the different areas. Um, again, where you look at different areas of your life. Financial wealth is something that you can create an entire vision board about. If you visualize getting to the millions, then visualize getting to the millions. Whatever vision you have, if you visualize wealth coming in the form of wisdom and ideas, then that goes on your vision board. And finally, children, what I've learned, are never too young to have vision. And every New Year's Eve, that's an activity that we do in our home. I have a 10-year-old daughter and I have an 18-year-old daughter. And for years, as long as I can remember, every New Year's Eve, we don't talk about resolutions, we talk about vision. And so I just want to point this out here because even this young child right here has vision. It's age appropriate vision, and it's to the degree that she visualizes things, but you know, it is very important for us to instill that in kids too. So if you do a vision board at home, I would encourage you to have your children, if you have children or if you know children, to engage in that activity as well. Again, so what are some concrete things that we can do to manage stress and stay empowered? Some of these things I'm going to stress and reemphasize over and over again because they're really important, really prominent things. And so I kind of want to, you know, um, sort of not beat a dead horse, but make sure that, we understand the importance. Again, mindfulness is being present in every moment without judgment. The hardest thing to practice is mindfulness, I have found, because we live in a society that's go, 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 go. Everything is go, go, go. We never stop. And ironically, you might say, well, we're in the middle of a pandemic, everything stops. That's the biggest irony of this whole thing is that, yes, things stopped in the sense of we're not doing the things that we used to do in the way that we used to do them. But if you notice, I mean, how many Zoom calls are we having every day? I'm not talking about informational webinars because I think that I would do a million webinars a day if I could. I'm talking about meetings at work. I'm talking about non-social related Zooms. And, we're just like the deadlines seem like they're coming quicker and we're not slowing down and it's impacting our mental health. And so mindfulness is so important in terms of scaling it back and being present. I want to emphasize this term called non judgmental stance because that is probably the biggest aspect of this term mindfulness is being non judgmental, doing it without judgment. So you might observe where you're at, how you feel, etc., but then you assign labels to it. Oh, this is bad that I'm feeling this way. This is not good. It's horrible. This behavior is, not going to get me anywhere. Whatever judgments that you have towards yourself. I mean, we have enough people criticizing us for us to criticize ourselves. And so working on that is extremely important. Breathing. Okay. So I remember when I was talking about this as I was preparing for this presentation, and my husband was like, that makes no sense. We breathe all the time. Let me just tell you, we forget to breathe. We forget our breath a lot of the time. And it sounds funny, but you really want to be conscious of your breath. There are times where you just going, and or I'm just going really fast paced. And I have to say, okay, Karen, breathe. I mean, just one deep breath, just one time a day to do that. But even further than that, I encourage you to do daily breathing exercises. I do want to make a point here, and again, I want to stay on time, that we often, if we do breathing exercises, we often facilitate it from our chest, and that is not what you want to do. If you're a singer, you're often taught to breathe from your diaphragm, and so singers understand this. But when you're doing breathing, and we don't have time to do a full breathing exercise right now, but you'll want to pay attention to your belly. So when you inhale, like with the count of five, your belly is going to actually, you can't see my belly, but it's going to expand, do the opposite of what you expect. And then when you breathe out, your belly's going to come in, and you're going to want to be very conscious of that breathing. Try to do that once a day. Part of that also is being connected physically. And so what a body scan is, similarly to breathing, is checking in with different parts of your body, because stress will rest in different parts of your body. Some people experience stress in different parts. So, like, you might be a migraine person or a headache person, tension headache. It resonates in your head. You might be like a GI person where you're going to have a bad stomach if you're under a lot of stress, and that gives you the signal. Maybe you have a lot of pain, and that's a signal to your body. So, body scanning involves like actually sitting there and scanning your body. A lot of people, again, think that that's counterintuitive, but there are research studies that have said that people who are in pain actually give the pain more power when they try to avoid it. But when they're able to scan their bodies and review where the pain is coming from, it actually lessens the pain. And finally, self advocacy. Always stand up for what you believe in, because again, when there's times of pressure and stress, sometimes I'm sure you can relate, there feels like pressure to sign on the dotted line, to do things that maybe in a normal situation you wouldn't do. It doesn't even have to be an extreme thing, but you always stand up for what you believe in. You want to stay connected to yourself. Gratitude journal, 5 daily mantras. Use your skills and being deliberate. I'm going to go over a couple of skills. Use your skills and be deliberate in your skill use. And also be very conscious of the things that may not be conscious defense mechanisms. So there are several mechanisms that we use in the midst of stress that may seem like they work, but they really don't. It might include avoidance. It might include suppressing feelings. It might include projection, projecting blame onto others, like we talked about with the external locus of control. So, be aware of those things. Specific skills that I want to quickly go over. I want to bring your attention to a manual. It's called Dialectical Behavioral Therapy. And it was created by Dr. Marsha Linehan in 93. This is a DBT cheat sheet, and I don't know if you guys are going to get a copy of this presentation, but it's a very extensive manual that talks about very concrete, specific skills that can be used for living effectively. For the sake of time, I'm going to go over three of my favorite skills to use. Again, it was used in a clinical setting, this dialectical behavioral therapy, originally for folks who had issues emotionally regulating. Then it generalized to people with anxiety. Now DBT is being used worldwide across the board with every population, and with just people like you and I who just want to use effective skills in order to manage stress. The three minds. There are three minds that DBT talks about. You want to be in wise mind. So you've got rational mind where people say, oh, that's where you want to be. You always want to be logical. But I do want to point out that sometimes the rational mind will ignore things that are important, like your gut, your first mind, your intuition, right? So you don't always want to be in that space. You don't ever want to be fully in that space because that's one extreme. Your emotional mind, on the other hand, is impulse based on what feels good. And it's often opposed to rational mind. But your wise mind is the balance. And I want to really stress that you always want to be in a place of balance right now, especially when you're talking about trying to get to a point of abundance or financial stability and even wealth. Um, Communication is extremely important during this time. Like I said before, you want to be able to effectively stand up for yourself, right? So it might feel very difficult to communicate what your needs are to varying people, whether it be coworkers, whether it be your employer, if you're self-employed, maybe your employees, um, people just out there in general who may need from you and they feels like they're taking. One DBT skill that you'll want to explore is called Dear Man, and it's an acronym to stand up. Rather to that stands for rather how you want to effectively communicate to people. So you can probably read this, but describe, express, assert, reinforce, continue to be mindful, appear confident. This really stood out for me. Appearing confident. I just want to speak to that for a minute because sometimes we feel like imposters. It's called imposter syndrome when you're not really feeling that confident. And of course, during this time, like mental health wise, it can feel like, we don't always have a reason to be confident. But I love this. It says appear confident. When I used to interview for anything, graduate school, a job, whatever, like my stomach would hurt so bad, the stress would be in my stomach and I would just be it would be in knots. But I remember this throughout the years that the other person doesn't know that my stomach is in knots. They don't have to know. I can appear confident. And N stands for negotiating. So if someone doesn't agree with your standpoint, your business values, your investments, whatever it is, there's room to negotiate and hear the other person out. So I would encourage you to also look up that skill a little bit further. This is Marsha Linehan. This is her picture. And radical acceptance is so very important. Radical acceptance rests on letting go of the illusion of control and willingness to notice and accept things as they are right now without judgment. Now, this might sound like a contradiction to what I said before, because what I said is that you want to have an internal sense of control in terms of your behavior, right? So, there is when she speaks to the illusion of control, she's not speaking to our personal accountability of behavior. What she's speaking to is the illusion that we can control what's going on around us. So, again, back to that bargaining with the pandemic, many of us have been like, man, if I do A, B, C, and D, then maybe like everything will just change. And we have somewhat of magical thinking, but radical acceptance involves accepting it is what it is right now. Doesn't mean being happy about it. And it doesn't mean that you are not going to do proactive things to make things better. But radical acceptance is the final DBT skill that I want to emphasize here that is really important. I want to say to you that this is something that I thought of many years ago, and it's not. I mean, I didn't. I'm reinventing the wheel. I mean, everybody knows this, but I just want to stress this again. That success is not determined by never falling. It is determined by always getting back up. I'm sure that each and every one of you on this call has a story. I shared my personal story with you, right? But what we know is that if we've been through some things in life, And if our mental health is being challenged, if our emotional wellness is being challenged because things are happening, and in the midst of that we make mistakes, maybe things are not going our way, but that is not the true measure of success. And the whole point of this talk was to talk about resiliency in the midst of a stressful time, in the midst of adversity. So you may fall, but success is determined by you always getting back up. And that was the last thing that I wanted to leave with you. I think I stayed on time, so I'm happy about that. And that's the end of my presentation. I think I can stop sharing now. So I think that this is the time where we open up for questions. We have a few minutes. If anything resonated with you, thank you, Tara. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Um, Thank you so much for that. I would like to open up for any questions because I know that we have a few minutes left. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you so much.
Can you hear
I
me?
call you mom.
Can you guys hear me? Yes. Quick quick question.
Anyone have any
Hold on.
questions? So,
Let me-
just out of curiosity, okay, so I'll sort of lead a dialogue here. I started out with, we call it a grab, something that, I wanted to sort of start out with that, that grabs people's attention. And I talked about the cortisol commercial. I just saw one last night. Just out of curiosity, I don't know if you want to raise your hand virtually in here or just say anything, but has anybody seen the commercial like that? And prior to today, how many people associated cortisol with belly fat? Just curious.
Um I did. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah. So several of you have seen that.
Hmm.
Yeah, me too. I saw it so many times throughout the years. I even thought about getting the cortisol belly fat supplements. Like I said, the most overt symptom of Cushing's, which is an actual medical excess of cortisol, is I'm sorry, rapid, unexplained weight gain for absolutely no reason. It's not contingent upon or dependent upon caloric intake, diet, or exercise. It actually is caused by specifically an excess of cortisol. By the time I was diagnosed, and that's a long story, if you ever want to ask me about it outside of this call, I had basically found out myself by watching an episode of Mystery Diagnosis, which was a show that was on the Discovery Channel. I don't know if anybody remembers that show, but it showcased rare illnesses. And I walked into my doctor's office and I said, I'm not leaving this office until you test me. And he said, there's no way you have it. It's too rare. You've got two kids, yada, yada. And he was wrong. But there were other symptoms, onset of diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart murmur, it shuts down organs. Uh, so while the weight gain is the most obvious symptom for many people, and yes, it does cause a huge abdomen section too, which is interesting. There are many symptoms that cause it to be life threatening. But I was curious as to who's heard of it because, again, the fact that our bodies produce a hormone just to deal with stress. Um, Thank you, Vanessa. Yeah, it is definitely okay to be happy. Definitely okay to be happy. Um, Vanessa, aka Mom, just said, you know, that thank you for giving permission to be happy. And yes, I find a reason to laugh
Hmm.
every day, whether it's watching who watches Kev on stage. That man cracks me up. Kev on stage. If you have not seen Kev on stage, look him up on Facebook and YouTube. He's hilarious. He's a Christian um, comedian, and the material is content appropriate. So I love that. It's clean material, but I find a reason to laugh every day. But yeah, I was just curious about who had seen commercials like that. We do need cortisol to survive. Yes, Kev on stage. That's correct, just like that.
Okay.
So if you look him
Okay.
up on YouTube, Facebook, I'm telling you, this man is funny, and he's grown from just doing like YouTube content to he just opened up his own studio basically and has his own app. He's grown quite a bit. So um, he's a black comedian. He's really really funny. Um, yeah, but yeah. So my whole point in bringing that up is, stress and being able to deal with stress is extremely, extremely important. Like I told you before, I went from end of the spectrum to the other, so my body cannot naturally produce the stress hormone. So I'm dependent on medical steroids to replace that cortisol. But our bodies, fun fact, produce up to 10 times the amount of our baseline cortisol in order to compensate for stress. So I'm telling you, like when you feel like you're having a heart attack because you're arguing with somebody over something, it's because your
Hmm.
body is trying
Hmm.
to compensate for that. And it's both good and bad stress. So it's not just like pandemic stress because, it's
Hmm.
affecting things negatively. It can be you're attending an event, like even pre COVID, your body will pump out this one hormone. Um, some people compare it to adrenaline, but your body will pump out this one hormone to deal with it. And so uh, um, I've come to understand the importance from both ends because in my case, if there's a situation like the other day, the fire alarm went off um, in my condo building, and in that situation, I had to take more cortisol because your body, even for that, will produce the cortisol, and which gives you the adequate adrenaline to deal with that. Or, um, if you're a mom and your baby was ever in danger and you had superhuman powers, your cortisol was pumping up then too in order to deal with it. So, okay, no more questions about that. Just one
That,
last question
can
because
you hear me?
we have a few minutes here. Does anyone want to speak to? So I talked about vision and visualization. Um, has anyone done a vision board, and if so, has it been helpful in being able to visualize things like abundance, wealth, growing in your career path, financial stability, things like that? Anyone want to speak to that? Everyone's on mute, but all I'll say about that is people do take it for granted that, visualization is 100 times more powerful than willpower. This is an actual fact. There have been studies that have shown that people, um, who visualize and they're like hooked up to different things where they're monitored, their minds, their brains actually, I'm not even talking about the psyche, I'm talking about the actual brain processes it as if it is so. So it's interesting that they've compared like groups of people. So like two groups who play, who shoot free throws, And one group, actually three groups. So one group are professional free throw players, or and they're able to just like knock it out of the park. Other group really has no idea what they're doing with the free throws, and they're not likely to get more free throws than the first group. But the third group are people who are told to visualize um, free throwing basketballs, and that group actually surpasses the group of professional free throwers because of the fact that the brain processes visualization in such a powerful way. So um, that is a crucial part of tightening up your mental health is and being in optimal mental health and being resilient, especially during this time, is daily visualization. Um, and even with the gratitude journals, I had attended a Jack Canfield seminar a couple of years back, pre-pandemic. Of course, it was a birthday gift to me from one of my best friends, and he's the person who I quoted a couple of times during this presentation. He is the co-author of Chicken Soup for the Soul series, and he talks about the power of visualization and how if you see it, then it it will come to pass. If you can see it in your mind and visualize it every day, it will come to pass. And one of the things that he talked about in terms of gratitude, the way that he phrased it was not only doing, listing things you're grateful for in the here and the now and things that are like actual realities in the real realm, but also saying things that you're grateful for that you project are going to happen, that you want to happen. So he always starts the gratitude phrase with, I am so grateful and happy now that. I am so grateful and happy now that, dot, dot, dot. And the that are the things that you want to come to pass. So I think during that time, I said, I am so happy and grateful that my circle is powerful women who want to empower each other, who support each other, and who love each other unconditionally. I am so grateful and happy now that I have a sisterhood circle of powerful women. And don't you know that this is a part of that vision? This is exactly a part of that vision, because the way that Victoria and I connected, she'll have to tell that story, but it is a small world out there. And here we are. But I noticed that when I started saying that in my gratitude journal every day, put it on my vision board, visualized it, this is definitely something that has been a part of my life, is having a strong sisterhood circle. So I think that's it. I mean, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to, let me write my email in the chat. It is in the presentation, like I said, if you get a copy of it. But it's Dr. Karen Timms at epictogether.org. I did write that correctly. Please feel free to email me, with any questions. I'm always happy to answer. So that's it. That's I think I'm time. That was my time.
That was great. Can you hear me?
That is a great affirmation too. I'm so happy and grateful that I am enough. That is right. And I kind of brushed over the mantras, saying, but I did have in there, say 5 daily mantras a day, and never give up. Never give up is a mantra in our home. And definitely, I am enough is a great mantra to include into that repertoire.
Yeah, that kind of goes with our reading, that goes with our group.
Victoria.
Thank
I
you
guess
so
I'll give the
much.
floor back over to you.
Can you hear me, Tara?
I can.
Okay. I don't think I was, yeah. Is Vicky back?
I'm actually gonna let Ms. Vanessa close the call for us. So you have the floor, Ms. Vanessa.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I thought Dr. Karen did a great job talking about good and bad stresses. The breathing, that's can be difficult. It sounds easy to breathe, and you're supposed to breathe from your diaphragm. The daily visualizing, I think that's important. Even with my vision board, I have that out there. And gratitude, just being thankful for the here and now and the present. And her story, Dr. Karen, your story was great. Not being able to walk and then just seeing that, it takes me back to when I was little, when Jesse Jackson used to say, if your mind can conceive, you know what I mean? That whole thing. And you didn't know that that was really just thinking positive, putting that out there. So we got to embrace the good and the bad stresses. We also have to know that it's okay to be happy, and kind of, one of the things she talked about was we thought it slowed down with COVID, but things just sped right up. So mentally, we're on these Zoom calls, we're in this meeting and whatever to decompress. And one day it'll open back up and we'll all be on vacation.
That's right.
So with that, does anybody have any questions or anything?
I just wanted to say that a lot of the conversation today with Dr. Karen, it kind of goes into a lot of the personal development books that we're currently reading, like the visualization and the positive affirmations. I think that she was right on target with what we're focusing on right now as a group.
Yep. And this has already been an amazing week. We got some good gems on our financial literacy. Today, we're having a healthy mind. Tomorrow, we're on the schedule. We're on the schedule tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday, Victoria is going to end it up. So everybody, please, we're posting it on Facebook. We're putting it out there. We're inviting our friends. You can spread the word and spread the link. We just want everybody to get good knowledge this week. And with that, we want to say thank you for tuning in, and any additional questions, Dr. Karen left her email address in the chat. Hopefully you're able to get it. If not, you can get that from Victoria, and continue to think positively and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Karen. It was wonderful.
Thank you, all of you. It was great having you.
Okay. All righty. Bye-bye.